Auschwitz, the concentration camp where, during World War II, the Nazis murdered more than 1 million Jewish people. 75 years later, survivors returned to the place where they suffered the trauma of their lives, the trauma of an entire people. Today, in this new military history video, we will accompany these people on a journey full of brutal stories and memories.
It was the most horrendous mass slaughter in human history. And the world chose at that time to be silent.
The Auschwitz concentration camp was established in May 1940 in Poland, near the town of Auschwitz. Its initial function was as a base for forced labor to aid the German war machine, but it was not long before its true purpose was revealed. 1.3 million people, most of them Jews, were sent to this dark place by the Nazis. Of these, 1.1 million never returned. Auschwitz had been intended as a key piece in the German plans for the final solution, with which they sought to eliminate from the face of the earth those they considered inferior to the Aryan race. But despite the unimaginable cruelty of Auschwitz and the atrocities committed within its barbed wire fences, thousands of people managed to survive. Most of them, understandably, never wanted to talk about what they experienced. The trauma was too great, but there were some who did, and even had the courage to revisit their hell decades later. For many, one of the hardest moments happened as soon as they got off the trains. It was at that moment that the selection process took place. The Nazi guards, together with the medical staff, chose who was fit to serve as a worker and who was not. Pregnant women, children, the elderly, and people with any kind of disability generally belonged to the latter group. Entire families who had often managed to survive German persecution up to that point were brutally separated. Before the terrified eyes of parents, children, and siblings, those marked as unfit were taken to chambers, which would become their graves.
You were seeing all these people coming in, and some, then some hours later, the chimneys were black with smoke and light, and the smell was terrible. So we knew that what was going on. It didn't take us very long. We found out.
Many of the prisoners escaped the gas chambers only by luck, by managing to sneak past the Germans, or by pretending to be older than they really were. Others were saved only by the whim of officers or doctors. The German scientist Joseph Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, spent much of his time at Auschwitz. There, he conducted all kinds of experiments. Obsessed with strange genetic conditions, many people who would have been sent to the chambers under normal conditions were instead brought to his laboratory. Mengele's favorite guinea pigs were twins.
There was a second German officer who decided that that's enough for the twins, we don't need them, and we were lined up for the gas chamber again. But however, Mengele by chance got wind of it and says, I will decide when this children will die, not another officer.
By taking part in Mengele's experiments, some of his test subjects survived until the end of the war, but many others were not so lucky. Mengele's trials were cruel. The doctor had no care for the prisoners' health. For a large number of them, the fate was the same as that which awaited them in the gas chambers. For the Jews who survived the initial selection, a terrible nightmare awaited them. First, they were stripped of any valuables or belongings, even their clothes, and given a uniform completely incapable of protecting them from the cold. Then they were completely shaved. Finally, each one was given a serial number, sometimes in the form of a tattoo. From then on, that would be their only identity. The Nazis' goal was to completely dehumanize their prisoners, turning them into animals or objects instead of people.
Auschwitz to me is a cemetery.
Conditions at Auschwitz camp were completely inhumane. The food the captives received was barely enough to survive on. Hygiene was non-existent. Barracks that could hold 700 people were filled with twice that number and generally had no toilets. They had to relieve themselves in a corner of the building. It is not surprising that disease was rife and claimed the lives of thousands of prisoners. But there is no doubt that this paled in comparison to the torture, both physical and psychological, that the Nazi guards inflicted on their captives. At all times, they terrorized the Jewish population by reminding them that their death was just a whim away.
The second day, I asked, when am I going to reunite with my mother? And they took me in the arm and showed me the chimney, and they said, when you go out the same way.
Every day was a battle for survival.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The Germans in charge of security in the camps were members of the Schutzstaffel, or SS. They were chosen based on their cruelty and lack of empathy, making them perfect for their jobs at Auschwitz, where almost every infraction was punishable by a bullet to the head. There was even the so-called Wall of Death that the Germans used to execute their victims in front of the eyes of the rest of the prisoners.
I remember the place where they were shooting the people at the wall. I remember the hangings. I remember the horror. I remember the smoke of the chimney coming out from the crematoria. I remember everything. It left such a scar on my soul and on my mind that I could never, ever forget it.
The reasons for the killings ranged from escape attempts or insults to one of the guards to having one's hands in one's pockets. The Germans frequently resorted to these methods to keep the captives in line. Jews saw someone die, either shot or hanged by the neck almost daily. The killings continued for years. Towards the end of World War II, even though Germany was being battered by the Allies, the gas chambers at Auschwitz were still in full operation. Adolf Hitler was determined to drive the Jewish people to extinction, even if he might not have been able to see it. The year 1944 was the bloodiest for the extermination camp. Germany invaded its former ally, Hungary, bringing with it the Holocaust. Many Jews in other parts of Europe, such as Poland and Yugoslavia, had fled to this country seeking to escape the German clutches. But for the Nazis, mercy was an alien concept, and soon deportations began. Trucks carried thousands of people daily, the vast majority headed straight to their deaths. The Germans were no longer interested in manpower. It is estimated that by the middle of that year, 20,000 prisoners were being killed every day. The gas chambers and crematoria could not cope with the number of bodies they had to dispose of. Some of the captives, sensing that their end was near, organized armed revolts after stealing weapons. These always ended in failure, but they showed that the fighting spirit of these people remained strong, despite the atrocities the Nazis inflicted on them daily. On these occasions, one could also glimpse the solidarity that the prisoners shared even after years of terrible captivity.
The grown-ups knew that they're going to be liquidated and they're going to uprise. But they felt it wasn't fair to the children to uprise. Mm-hmm. So they marched to their yard. They were singing on their way to the crematorium.
By the end of 1944, the German situation was untenable. With the Soviet Red Army very close to Auschwitz, German leaders ordered the destruction of the camp and the evacuation of its prisoners. Suspecting that they would lose the war, they wanted to eliminate all evidence of the crimes carried out there to avoid being judged in the future. Survivors who were able to move were put on trains, or even forced to march to other camps within German territory. Those who were too weak to walk were to be killed. However, the chaos of the evacuation of Auschwitz meant that the Nazis were unable to completely liquidate its population. They were forced to withdraw, leaving thousands of Jews alive who, on January 27, 1945, watched as the first Soviet soldiers opened the gates of their liberation.
6 o'clock or 5, about 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I looked around and suddenly I saw the first Russian soldier running by the side of the building. We are inside buildings like this, and I was in the window over there and saw one of the Russian soldiers just, and that's finally.
Many cried tears of joy when they realized they had been liberated, but others suspected that it was all a German trap and that they would soon be caught. As the days went by, however, they accepted the reality. they had managed to survive one of the worst genocides in the history of mankind. Despite this, there were no great celebrations. There were major logistical problems in how to get food and medicine to these former prisoners. Even without the Nazis around, they continued to die from diseases such as typhus, dysentery, and many others. Sadly, some of these people were in such a state of malnutrition that their bodies could not take advantage of the food given to them by the Soviets. Thus, thousands of Jews died after their liberation. But even those who were able to overcome the physical problems caused by Auschwitz and managed to regain their health would never be the same again. What they experienced there during those terrible years left scars that would be impossible to erase. Approximately 7 million people, 2/3 of the Jewish population in Europe, died at the hands of the Nazis during the Holocaust. Entire families, with dozens of members, were cruelly murdered. Those that were not completely eliminated left only a few members alive who could bear witness.
Auschwitz is like a terrible scar from a terrible trauma. It never goes away, and the pain never stops. Do not be silent. Do not be complacent. Do not let this ever happen again to any people.
Many of those who managed to escape from Auschwitz alive have offered to tell their stories. For many, the reason they managed to survive is to give their testimony and ensure that this terrible massacre is not forgotten. For this reason, some of them say they are frightened by what they see in certain sectors of the population. It is a tendency to forget the Holocaust and what it meant for the Jewish people and for all those marked as subhuman by the Nazis.
This is history, and people intend to forget. As time goes on, they become disenchanted and they don't care much because it didn't happen to them.
All survivors speak of one thing in common. Denying what happened is opening the door for something like the Holocaust to happen again, both against the Jewish people and against others. Some of them already see this happening in some parts of the world. At every opportunity, they are reminded of the consequences of watching evil rise and doing nothing to stop it.
It could happen to here too. It could happen. What the Germans did it. A country like that, sophisticated, intelligent people became beasts, even animals.
These fears are still present in the survivors of Auschwitz. Yet their survival meant that the Nazis were unable to achieve their goals. Not only did they fail to eliminate the Jewish people and those groups marked as undesirable, but they were also unable to eliminate their humanity. Their current testimonies seek to prevent a new massacre, showing that despite what they suffered in the concentration camp, they continue to maintain their solidarity.
I never thought to come to walk on this earth. I never thought I will ever walk here. But now I decided it's time to show the world that thank God we are still alive. I won.
We've reached the end of this video and we want to ask you, what do you think about the stories you've just heard? Leave us your answer in the comments box below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.